Hi friends and fellow book nerds, welcome back to the channel. I don't do reading wrap-ups and like TBR videos that often, but I did read a few this month that I wanted to talk about for good and bad reasons. And I do like to create a little bit of a TBR for myself just to make it easier so that when I feel like I'm in the mood for something in particular, I can go look at it. So I have a combination of Libby loans, audiobooks, physical books. We're just gonna jump right into it with the very first book of March, which was Berry Pickers. I listened to this on audio through Everand. This was part of a free trial. You can choose 3 free books, either ebooks or audiobooks. So this was the first one that I picked, and something about the cover just really drew me into this. I was feeling like I wanted to get into like the spring summer mood. It's basically a historical fiction with like a little bit of mystery in there. This is a story of an indigenous family who comes from the Nova Scotia area. I really enjoyed the setting of this one, which is basically Maine and Nova Scotia in the 60s. And then it also time jumps to kind of more present day narratives as well. And it's about a family whose 4-year-old daughter goes missing when they go down to Maine to do their annual like seasonal work and pick berries during the summer months, and they like stay in a cabin, the whole family goes. I think it's the Gemini in me. I love the kind of dual perspective, and getting to jump back and forth really keeps it engaging for me. So while I didn't find either POV to be like my favorite necessarily, I do really enjoy that. So because of this disappearance, you do get some of that mystery aspect, but I feel like it's not super twisty turny thriller. It's more of a historical fiction, and as you read this, I would say maybe, you know, by the 50% mark, you kind of can anticipate what's coming. But because I didn't go in thinking that this is going to be like some big aha thriller, I wasn't disappointed. The last few chapters really pulled at my heartstrings. I felt like it was really emotionally moving by the end. I did find it to be well written and put together nicely. You get a lot of those kind of familial aspects, which I really like. Really covers a lot of like the human emotion when it comes to something like this, with a lot of family trauma, kind of interpersonal, very close relationships of brothers, mothers, fathers, sisters, that kind of thing. I would definitely recommend this like for a good summer read if you're like going on a vacation, like to a cabin or a lake or something. If you find yourself in Maine or, you know, the Northeast United States, Nova Scotia this summer, this would be a great pick. I gave this a 3.5, rounded up to a 4 for Goodreads. The audiobook narration wasn't my favorite, but wasn't the worst I've ever listened to either, so I quite enjoyed this one. Next, we have the next installment of my first ever Twilight read, and that was Eclipse. This seems to be kind of an unpopular opinion when I was like looking at reviews for this, and some of the comments from some of my friends when they saw that I said that I didn't quite like this as much as the other installments so far, because this is kind of when it like starts to ramp up, right? Like you're getting Bella having to choose between the two guys, and you're getting a lot of that kind of like vampire werewolf tension. And I don't know why, but for some reason this just wasn't my favorite. I think it was just quite dragged out. Something that I just have to accept with this is that I'm a 33, you know, pushing 34-year-old reading Twilight, and it's a teenager. It's a teenage girl. And, you know, so I can't get too upset about like all the naivety and like stupidness that's going on. And, you know, her having to pick between two guys that seems very juvenile. I have to kind of put myself in the right shoes and lens for that and be understanding of it. But I don't love the trope of like a girl having to pick between two guys. I don't know what it is. For some reason, I enjoyed New Moon more, even though I'm Team Edward. And New Moon is more of like Jacob's book, where Bella is starting to kind of fall for him and bordering that line of like friendship to maybe something else. And then in Eclipse, she kind of has to face that with both of them. Really didn't enjoy the way that Jacob was acting in this book. Very forceful, a lot of non-consensual actions that he is doing here. And I just wish there was more ramping up to Edward and Bella being married, her turning into a vampire, instead of like these little crumbs that I feel like we're getting at this point for like a 600, 700 page book. It's a good setup for the finale for Breaking Dawn, but my overall consensus is I wish this series had more of Bella as an actual vampire earlier on, and like her committing and choosing Edward and the Cullens like sooner in the series, which I understand that it's kind of like setting up of her falling for a vampire. That's kind of like the whole vibe. And in real life, if this was to really happen, you would hope that she would take a little bit more time before making a huge decision like that, so I can't really, you know, fault it too much. But overall, this was a 3-star. It's just a fun time. I'm really enjoying reading this series for the first time, but this was my least favorite installment. I have a feeling Breaking Dawn's going to be my favorite, but we'll see. I did just purchase Breaking Dawn and Midnight Sun so that I can finish this official first Twilight read. I am going to be reading this soon and finishing it and definitely be vlogging it, so subscribe if you want to see that. Speaking of vlogs, I did post a reading vlog recently where I read and finished Intermezzo, which is the next book on my March reads. This was so highly anticipated for me, and I'm so happy to report that it definitely delivered. I took a while to finally get to this because I was so scared that it wouldn't live up to my very, very high expectations, because my thing with Sally Rooney at this point is that Normal People is a 5-star top favorite book of mine, and her other 2 works, Conversations with Friends and Beautiful World, Where Are You, were underwhelming for me. With the former being one that I actually actively disliked. I was very nervous to read Intermezzo. I was afraid that it would dismantle the idea that I really love Sally Rooney as an author. I can say that I do officially still love Sally Rooney as an author because I really enjoyed this. I really loved the character dynamics. 2 brothers who are about 10 years apart and have kind of very different personalities. They're both dealing with the death of their father, so there's a lot of grief and trauma here. They both have a complicated relationship with their mother, but they handle things in life and view things in a very different way. But then there's also those very minute and kind of like underlying similarities that I just feel like is so common with siblings that I really enjoy reading about. In general, the kind of sibling relationship there, I could relate to a lot of the things because I'm an older sibling. So there's a lot of that kind of trauma bonding. Something about Sally Rooney with her dialogue is she doesn't use quotation marks. Everything is very stream of consciousness, thoughts running into dialogue, running into reactions of those scenes and dialogues, and a lot of just describing what characters are doing, sitting in a coffee shop, walking to class, you know, making food, thinking about their ex, daydreaming about the person they're dating. I personally love that. I can see why people don't like it. So both of these brothers are in an like age gap relationship, and you can see how their trauma and things that are happening in their lives and their own personal mental health issues are kind of, you know, guiding them into these like non-traditional relationship dynamics, kind of personal opinion of what people think, you know, is acceptable or is normal. And I just thought that Sally Rooney explored that in a really tactful way. I just think it's so relatable and real. And I also feel like this didn't rely as heavily on like the miscommunication trope. That's definitely still in there. It's a Sally Rooney, so it's still in there, but not quite as bad as some of her other books. I think if you really enjoy just reading about flawed characters and how people's trauma and mental health can just affects the way that they live their life, it really touches on people's really low moments, but then also positive high moments of people, you know, realizing that this is what life is all about. You know, that sometimes love and pain are intertwined and they're kind of one and the same sometimes. I wouldn't recommend any Sally Rooney if you really need like a succinct plot resolution, because you're never going to get that with a Sally Rooney. Everything is very vague and situational and open-ended with her books on relationships and people. I just think that's sometimes how stories go, right? They're not done yet. You can kind of insert yourself in your experience to how you think that would end or how you think it's going to go. There's no right or wrong answer because these are just like real people, right? That's kind of how I interpret her books. I feel like they just really hit me emotionally. That's Intermezzo. 4.5 was just missing that little oomph, that little Normal People aura. I don't know what it was. Didn't quite hit the 5 stars for me, but I really did love this one. Lastly, we have the worst book that I have read so far this year. One of the worst books I have read in recent years overall. This is a very popular, highly rated book in the fantasy romance genre right now, and that's When the Moon Hatched. This just suffered from so many of the downfalls that are plaguing this entire genre right now, which I fear is just a real lack of actual writing skill and so much reliance on tropes and sexual content that the genre is really suffering, in my opinion, right now. It sucks because this plot, this fantasy plot and world and setting had a lot of potential. By the way, I also listened to this on audiobook, and I was half listening, skimming for the final, 25%. And I think that if a lot of people listen to this writing and this prose, as opposed to just reading it, I think they would feel differently. Some of this writing and some of this dialogue and things that this main character says, I think if you said them out loud, you would realize how embarrassingly cringe they are. An example of a writer trying so hard to use a lot of big words to sound very eloquent and impactful. And it honestly just has the opposite effect because so much of this makes no actual sense. People don't speak like this. People don't write like this. People don't use these words ever. Some of the plot had the potential, but I honestly couldn't overlook the absolute atrocity of this writing. And I know that's harsh, but I genuinely really do feel that way. And the female main character, unfortunately, also suffers from the very overused sassy assassin trope. She's a ball buster and she keeps knives in her boots and everyone's out to get her, and she, she's not like other girls, and she's mean to every man she meets, and she's so small and petite, and she's so guarded, and she has such a cold heart, Juxtaposing medieval fantasy language and settings and, titles and things like that with contemporary language, things like repeating the word microcock multiple times, describing a man, makes no sense in this world. It's so cringe and so bad, but so much of it was so superfluous. Like just describing things with I'm not kidding, 5, 6, 7 adjectives, never just using the word for something. Always has to be a metaphor, always has to be some crazy description. And that's coming from someone who loves fantasy. I love Tolkien, who's known to go on a 3-page description of a tree. I'm gonna put up some of the quotes that reviews on Goodreads have pointed out because I listened to this, so I didn't have anything to be highlighting or writing down or anything while I was listening. This is a literal quote. "You can reshape a turd an infinite number of times, but it's still a turd. It still stinks." You can't use that in the same book that you're also describing the maw of a dragon and saying where's the privy, and then also saying go jerk off your microcock to a guy. It's that doesn't make sense. It sounds terrible. You don't have to use a metaphor over and over and over and over. It doesn't make it interesting. It just makes it repetitive and weird and disjointed and distracting to read. A lot of alliteration in this as well. Again, to the point where it's overboard. You specifically went to a thesaurus to be let me figure out how I can put 3 different alliterations in this one sentence. Another example on Goodreads, I will put up the user here. "It oscillates between an argent haze of barely there shape and strong, sturdy feline with a tufted tail and flowing mane that tangles with the wind, like the tendrils are dancing with Claude. Something bumps against my cheek, ripping me from the fiery clutches of a dream that was melting flesh from my bones in a slow, sizzling sweep." It's too much. I hated it. That's When the Moon Hatched. Can't recommend it. Can't get those hours of my life back either, unfortunately. So as far as my April TBR goes, I have a few anticipated new releases that I'm not sure that I will get to right away because I generally don't. But they are 2 that I'm very, very excited about, and that is Enchantra, which is the sequel to Phantasma, which was the kind of dark romance, New Orleans inspired, magical trial. Was one of my favorite fantasy dark romances I have read. Really loved the male love interest in that one. I might wait for this one to come back around on Kindle Unlimited because I did read the first one on Kindle Unlimited and it's still on there, by the way, if you want to read it. This is another one that's coming out I'm very excited for. This is Faithbreaker, which is the 3rd and final installment of the Fallen Gods fantasy series. This is Godkiller and Sunbringer, which I have mentioned on the channel before. Bit more of a mythology high fantasy World does have romance, but it's not spicy. It's not really like in the fantasy romance genre. These covers are some of my favorites. I absolutely think they're gorgeous. And then my book club with a few friends of mine is getting back together for April, and I'm very excited. We haven't done a book together in probably about 6 months or so, and we're doing a Greek mythology Medusa retelling that I suggested to the group, so the pressure's on. I'm hoping that it is good, and that is Stoneblind. I believe this is by Natalie Hayes. Let me look. I read another Natalie Hayes, and it wasn't my favorite, but because this one is a Medusa retelling, I'm willing to give it a try. So I did actually grab a copy of this one. Yeah, Natalie Hayes, who did 1,000 Ships, I want to say, which I think I only gave a 3-star, but this one is a gorgeous cover as well. So I'm excited for that one. So that's a definite read for April. Another Greek mythology that I did use my 3rd free Everand credit on is Hera, and I've read a lot of the other ones by her. Jennifer Saint. I've read Atalanta, and I've read Electra by her. And I also just bought Ariadne from her. But Hera, I have the audiobook through my Everand, so that one's definitely going to be listened to. So then we are also going to do at least one book from my stack that I mentioned in one of my recent videos, which I said I wanted to do like a Read It or Unhaul It series on the channel. So that's just a lot of mostly kind of fantasy historical fictions that I just have picked up randomly at thrift stores over the last couple of years, and I just haven't got to them, and I would like to either read them and leave them on my shelf or make room. So I'm going to pick one from that stack. I'm going to list or show a picture of that stack or something here. Then the last one is one I'm very excited for, and I should be getting it in my Libby in just a few days because I got it last week and I just wasn't ready for it yet, so I pushed it off. But I do have a hold for Out on a Limb, which is a contemporary romance, which is not my usual thing, but I do enjoy them from time to time. And this one has been highly, highly recommended by multiple friends of mine. Rochelle at Good Morning Dreamer, I know she loves this. If I'm not mistaken, it's like one of her favorites. And one of my good friends in my book club also has said this was like a top new favorite romance for her. April is also Limb Difference Awareness Month, so I would love to get to that one in April. I'm lucky that my Libby loan coincided for that. I also have 2 books kind of on the go right now that I'm hoping to finish in April. The first on my Kindle is Where the Library Hides. I'm about halfway through this, so hopefully I'm going to finish it in the next week or so. Enjoying it. Not obsessed, but am enjoying it. And I'm also listening to Jade Legacy, which is the final installment of the Greenbone saga trilogy, which I am obsessed with, and I have talked about a lot on the channel. This is the last and 3rd book in the series, and they're just so good. They're so intense. They're so emotional. They're action-packed. I'm obsessed with this series. So I'm about 25% of the way through that one, and I am savoring it because I love it so very much. So that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you guys for just hanging out with me, listening to me talk about books. I don't do these videos very often. They don't always do the best on the channel. So if you have made it this far, I would really appreciate it if you would like and leave a comment. Subscribe if you wanna see any more reading vlogs of any of the books that I'm chatting about. Let me know what your most anticipated read for April is, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.